Hello and welcome to the Last Mixtape podcast. My name is Stephen White, and on this week's show, we muse on the return of Oasis by the history of Paris and the latest music from the week that was. But first, welcome back to the Last Mixtape podcast. Paris was first settled in 2025 BC by the Celtic tribe, the Parasai. It was conquered by the Romans on and off throughout the centuries, survived the Black Death, saw revolution, the guillotine, the Reign of Terror, the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. It was home to Hemingway, Joyce and Fitzgerald, saw the French resistance in World War II. And on August 29th, 2009, it saw the breakup of one of the biggest bands of those 20 years prior, Oasis. Now, this past week, Oasis have returned some 16 years later, or it will be 16 years later, with a new statement. The guns have fallen silent, the stars have aligned, the great wait is over. Come see, it will not be televised. With the announcement of a live tour next year, they'll be coming to Dublin's Croke Park on August 16th and 17th. Tickets are on sale as I record this podcast, and as I can see through different kind of takes and everything going on with that, which is the usual with Ticketmaster. This year marks the 30th anniversary of their seminal debut album, Definitely Maybe, with songs like Supersonic, Slide Away, Cigarettes and Alcohol, which was one of the first singles I ever bought with Cigarettes and Alcohol on tape, and it came in a cigarette packet of all things. You would not get that now, but such was the effect of that band at the time. It's a huge announcement. It's one that people have been waiting for years on. One of the biggest bands of the 90s, of the early 2000s as well, to a different degree. It's interesting to see the reaction to it online. Obviously, look, people are going to have a bit of fun with it, going to make some memes and stuff like that, and have just a bit of fun, which is totally fair. It's interesting in that way that Oasis became a band in which they became memeable towards the end, and a lot of that had to do with Britpop itself and the kind of the aftermath. There was kind of claims online about dad rock and things like that, which I find very interesting. Even kind of the talk of that, because the idea of, I've seen people who use that term dad rock in the past, and it's interesting to watch kind of the chickens come home to roost in terms of of that, and now the bands they love being referred to dad rock. I'm not a big fan of the term though, and it did make me kind of muse on nostalgia and the meaning of nostalgia, which I think comes from, I think the actual literal definition of it, or the terminology or the etymology of it, is a painful wound or pain from an old wound or a reminder. And I think that's kind of where on the online reaction to this I kind of split. Now, as I say, there's lots of discourse and everything on it. There's talk about ticket sales and all of these kind of things, or they're only back for the money and all of these things. I don't think, even when they were in their height, I don't think Oasis ever shied away from the fact that they wanted to make money and be the biggest band and play the biggest shows. So kind of, I don't feel they're like betraying anything by coming back, playing big gigs, getting paid a lot of money for it. That seems to be part of the price. The tickets, however, is a different conversation when it comes around Ticketmaster and things like that, and it's far beyond me. And look, I'll be very honest with you, this is a vibes podcast. I'm not going to go into the kind of the finance and the numbers, but I'm sure there's people who will. But for me, the idea of it being nostalgia, and can actually music be nostalgia? Now, I don't think it can be. I think music, art, photographs, all these types of things can trigger nostalgia. The pain from an old wound, I think that, it's a very, old kind of, meaning for the word. I think it means warmer, more heart, pulling at the heartstrings type things now. But definitely at the time, like there is, like with me as well, like when I hear Oasis, or even when they get back together, there is a pull towards that. There is a pull towards, I'm 37, so I remember all of it. I bought Definitely Maybe. As I said, one of the first singles was Cigarettes and Alcohol. I bought What's the Story, Morning Glory. It does take me back to those times. But I think music lives beyond beyond that of nostalgia. I think art lives beyond that of nostalgia. It can trigger it, but music and art are things to be experienced all the time. They are not just mere reminders of what has happened. And I think that's kind of interesting in a way, because as I say, I was born in the 80s. I don't remember the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or Fleetwood Mac or any of those things, but I listened to them. I don't get nostalgic feelings for them. I would have loved to see Kate Bush live or even Fleetwood Mac or bands like that live. It would have been amazing. I would not go to that gig with nostalgic feelings. I don't listen to those albums with nostalgic feelings. And I don't think people listen fully to Oasis purely because of nostalgia. And that's why I don't think they're a nostalgia act. They were, at one point, the most seminal band in the 90s, along with Blur and Pulp and bands like that and Britpop, and we'll go into a little bit of that in a little while. But the reason why I brought up the city of Paris is, not alone that it is my favourite city, but it made me think of that when they broke up in Paris. Paris is a city with immense history, as I rattled off there, and I'm sure historians will be like, no, it's all completely wrong, and you're totally fair, it probably is. But the idea that kind of music exists in that same way, that you can walk through history, that you can, look at the amazing buildings and the architecture and the art, and you can take it in. And there's plenty of younger people listening to bands like Oasis, or indeed influenced or inspired by bands like Oasis, that have taken in what that band did, and will continue to do so, and bands like them did themselves. Oasis themselves, and Noel has been very open about this, have stolen liberally from the past, especially bands like T-Rex, I think especially around Definitely Maybe, and a little bit of Slade as well. They themselves did not grow into the ether out of nothing. No music does. But we also have to admit to ourselves that younger generations and younger listeners, and if you are one, it'll happen to you, where the music that you loved and everything like that will be seen as kind of old, and it must be put to one side and it must be, destroyed, in the kind of the punk year one way. And then punk itself was still just rock and roll played quicker. But still, the idea of this kind of year one, year dot, kind of like, I exist without nothing. And you sometimes see that with bands where they're like, oh no, I just came up with this all on my own and not influenced by anyone. You're like, bullshit. Oasis, for generations to come, would become the cornerstone for them, and still is for a lot of people. Seeing a band like this get back together is incredible, and people are going to go to these shows and have fun and listen to great music. You say what you want, but Noel and Liam are musicians, and as a band will come on and they will absolutely deliver on what they mean to do. These would be great rock and roll shows. It's interesting, there's a podcast clip recently where they were talking about a lack of bands on the charts, if you look in recent years, and whether or not that's good or bad is merely just a kind of a sign of taste, but it is a fact. And just kind of the diminishing amount of bands and pop groups and stuff like that in favour of more solo artists and duos, more or less solo artists. And that kind of idea that those bands kind of exist and what is happening. We're talking about Fontaines and stuff like that, and outgrowing scenes and outgrowing stuff like that. And I think one of the things you can say about Oasis is that they kind of fell for that trap when Britpop happened, when the Britpop boom and bust happened. They were the poster kids for it. Those two faces of Noel and Liam were on all the magazines. They were all over the news. They were referred to as Britpop, the Union Jack guitar and all these things, Brit Awards, all of these types of things. And they didn't, when the moment was right, and there's a great video essay on Be Here Now by Todd in the Shadows, and I think he's Train Records series. And people, the diehard fans might perhaps defend Be Here Now. I don't even think Noel does. I think it is trash. It is a train crash of an album. It's certainly in its sound and certainly in its production. It's all high end, no low end, and it's everything at 11. But they didn't change enough in that moment to survive, as I say, what would turn them into a meme in the years that they were still touring up to 2009. They became almost against their will still the poster boys for that scene, and as that scene became less relevant, it kind of turned them less relevant. The 15 years since have been a lot kinder to Oasis in those terms, almost kind of the idea of going away and dreaming it all up again. They needed to be apart for us to appreciate them. Definitely Maybe and What's the Story, Morning Glory are two of the greatest rock albums of all time. Definitely Maybe is one of the greatest debut albums of all time. Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger, Champagne Supernova, as I say, Cigarettes and Alcohol, Supersonic, Live Forever, all of these songs are classics. Wonderwall is the big one that and it's again memeable anyway. Here's Wonderwall. Has become, a classic beyond even them. It's probably one of the most covered songs ever. So they kind of existed beyond it. So the idea then that they are purely nostalgia is incorrect. They are part of the musical conversation. Their greatness established them in a place where they would influence bands for decades since, the 30 years since Definitely Maybe. The ramifications of that and the resonance of that is still felt. Them coming on and playing gigs next year is a testament to them, surely, purely on the reception it has gotten, but also the love it's gotten. It's important, and I think it's important for everyone to remember this. Like, we're talking about this when we're talking about Taylor Swift and the idea of don't be a dick. And, you can have opinions on music. Talking about music, I think, is one of the most beautiful things you can do. There's this terrible quote, I think it's attributed to Frank Zappa, where is it talking about music is like dancing to architecture? You shouldn't do it. I've never agreed with that. I think conversations about the music you like and how music touches you is one of the most important conversations you can have, and one of the most telling. Because you see how passionate people are. Usually when people talk about music, and they're talking passionately, especially about the music that they love. And seeing all the people talk passionately about Oasis, and sometimes in nostalgic terms about how they remember X, Y, and Z, but just the excitement of going to see them is incredible. And the amount of younger people now that will go to those gigs too and have great experiences. Music, as I say, lives beyond the idea of nostalgia, because you don't have to remember music. You can play it at any time you want. It's readily available. If you want to listen to the Beatles, if you want to listen to those bands, that music is there. It exists. You can do that at any time. To me, nostalgia is a memory of something, as I say, pain from the old wound, that you cannot easily recall. It's a memory of some point or period in your life. Whereas music is always there. You can always listen to David Bowie, even though he passed. You can always listen to Kate Bush, although she doesn't tour or release new music. Those things exist with us. So I think nostalgia is an unnecessary term. Going back to the dad rock thing, I think that's an unnecessary term as well. I think we like to look in music in those ways to distance ourselves away and think that the things that we like will always be current and relevant. They won't. But I can guarantee you, when Oasis do play their shows here and elsewhere, and as part of that tour, you will see people who would have been my age when Oasis still first came out, absolutely adoring it and getting influenced by it, getting inspired by it, delving back into those albums. I think it's good for them too, in terms of allowing people that time to kind of move past the period in which they were in decline. And again, I think the hardcore Oasis fans might not see that, but they were. The albums lessened in quality. There was always one or two great songs here or there, but albeit far removed. And it seemed as well the gigs were getting not as great too. So this kind of period of kind of being away and coming back, I think will bring them back into a kind of relevance. It won't make them as relevant as the younger bands that are coming up now are more exciting. That's not everything has to be those things. These things can all exist at the same time. We don't need everything to be immediate and relevant, and we can allow other musics to be so. I think it's great on the whole. I think it's incredibly gratifying to see that, incredibly gratifying to see people's reaction to music in that way. I think I've obviously seen the negative of that, and I think people taking the memes too far and just becoming kind of grouchy and kind of mean about it. I don't agree with that. I don't agree. Like, I see a lot of people doing that with Coldplay, who are playing in Croke Park, and I actually quite like some of Coldplay. But just being like, it's people going to see a gig. And I think it's important to remember that for all the people now who are buying the Oasis tickets and excited about it, think about, if you did, think about your reaction to Taylor Swift playing the same venue, or whoever playing that big venues like that, and thinking, oh my God, I can't believe X, Y, and Z. And like, people are going to go see gigs and enjoy them. That's what music is about. It shouldn't be just the choices to be cool, or just the kind of the things that to make some sort of statements about who you are. Going to a gig and having fun, listening to a record and enjoying it, and allowing yourself to go back to some other time, is a beautiful thing that music and art affords us. And I think in that way the Oasis reunion is great. On another level, it did make me think about the parasocial element of it, and it made me think of the Beatles' recent documentary Let It Be. Now, that's not a new thing to just kind of like, Oasis and the Beatles, oh my God, how did you come up with it, Steve? No. The Let It Be documentary, I remember it vividly because I had done panels with people who were Beatles fans, and they were Beatles fans, absolutely Beatles fans. But they seemed to talk about the Beatles, one in these kind of like ones and zeros kind of feel of like, on this day in 1962, they had breakfast, and then they walked down the street, took a left, took a right, and then did it. And you're just like sitting there going, do you like the Beatles? What part of the music do you like? Because the facts you got down, like the facts in the times and the who was where and who was standing where, you got it down. But I don't know, you're not really selling to me your love of the music. But they would talk about John and Paul and George and all them, and well, he hated him, and in this interview here he said this about him, and that meant he hated him, and he always hated him, and all of this kind of stuff. And when you watch Let It Be, you realise it's just a bunch of friends who were friends from pretty much when they were kids, growing apart. They're all dressed differently, they all have their partners or their interests or everything else. They're just friends growing apart, and yes, in kind of everything else, they wrote songs about each other and there was anger there, and that sometimes happens. But they were people at the end of the day. And had some of them lived longer to this time, perhaps they would have reconciled, perhaps they would have reunited, who knows, in another way. And that made me think of Oasis. Yes, they do talk shit about each other online, but they're brothers. They're people. And after 15 years, there's every chance that they reconciled. Maybe they reconciled far beyond this, who knows, maybe whatever. But I think it's important to remember that these people that we talk about, whose music we talk about, who we see doing the interviews and all of that, are people. You see the recent TikToks by Chappell Roan and what she has to say about that. And I thought that was incredibly relevant. This idea of like, I'm just a stranger whose music you love and whose art you love, but that's the part of the deal. I make this music, you love it, you listen to it, you come to the shows, all of that kind of stuff, but she doesn't owe anybody anything. And you don't know her as a person, no more than we know Noel or Liam or John Paul, George and Ringo or whomever. These are just people. So it did make me think on that element of it, how great it is if indeed they haven't spoken or really played together or anything like that in 15 years, how gratifying it is to see those two people reconcile and go out and make music again or play music again, whether or not they make music again. I think that's also really good. I think that's also something to be glad about and be happy about. Music is much more than nostalgia. It's much more than dad rock or a product of its time or whatever like that. It exists with us, it moves with us, it grows with us. The resonance of it can be seen for generations to generations. We can go on Spotify and listen to songs that are 80 years old. We can listen to songs that were written hundreds of years old. Much like Paris the city. See, I just tied it all back together there. It wasn't just some random thing I did at the start of the podcast / video viewer. It is an ongoing conversation that we are all moving through and living through. And why not go see one of the, at their time, biggest bands in the world, and who could very well be in 2025 one of the biggest live bands in the world too. So for those reasons, I think the reunion of Oasis is a good one. Yes, dear listener, they seek him here, they seek him there, those musos seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven or is he at the disco? That damned elusive, the Count of Monte playlisto. Yes, the style and profile limousine ride jet fine. Playlist making son of a gun has once again returned to the shores of Playlistia to bring you another beautiful bounty in the form of TLMT's Irish mixtape on Spotify with all the latest Irish music for you to delve into. The Count rides again. Let us begin this. For the listeners of the podcast, that cuts seamlessly into this next section, which has like music and everything, but it's harder to do it with the video. Anyway, starting off this week's playlist picks with Really Good Time and their brand new single Pension Fund, and this is a fuzzy rock and roll, snarled, gritty, pounding kind of track, full of kind of call and response kind of feels. We've covered Really Good Time multiple times on the podcast, and how much they're kind of one of those bands that are just kind of bubbling under, waiting to come out really. And I think this single is just another sure sign of it, like that kind of riff rock kind of type thing that they're doing with the almost rock and roll pastiche almost, and at times Elvis kind of type thing. It really kind of works and really kind of grabs you. It's something quite interesting with that style, interesting with that kind of that flair of music as well, that it has this kind of self-awareness, but also delivers on what you want from that kind of rock and roll, kind of the hard-hitting feel of it, the grittiness, the pounding kind of sound. And they really kind of are able to do that because vocally or lyrically there's these elements of political and social satire within the lyrics. They take the frame of the point of view of these kind of unreliable narrators, so that kind of plays into the almost kind of pastiche elements that they play in. And you know, as a live band as well, they have that really strong sound to them, and they have these kind of elements where they all pause and do all these kind of things, and they have that raucous energy that comes with this style of music. So I think, Pension Fund is once again another sign of that. The band are really just kind of waiting to kind of punch out and really go. And this song is, you know, one that does that. It's quite danceable as well in its feel and its sound. You can, again, we were talking about music last week when we were talking about the Fontaines and stuff. Music that makes you move, especially in the earlier part of your career. Getting crowds and people to move with you and move to your music in whatever way is so important, and this is definitely one that does. It should be said that in their press release they said that their target audience is the citizens of planet Earth, which is good. I'm one of them. You're presumably one of them, hopefully. And so it's for us, it's for everyone. So that's a Really Good Time and their brand new single Pension Fund. Check it out on the playlist or wherever you want to listen to music. I'm not the boss of you. Next up we have Big Sleep and their brand new single Go. And this is kind of going slightly the opposite way, and they're another band that are kind of bubbling under and really kind of like have laid together a string of really great singles. A swaying, texture-rich release, this one again moving into that kind of lush dream pop feel. And they're a band that really explore texture, and really, again, for a band that are kind of in the very early days, able to enter into and able to kind of pull out these songs that sound kind of mature beyond the years in which the band have existed. And that's amazing. That's really hard to do, especially with dream pop and stuff like that. You can fall foul of lots of things with dream pop. I love dream pop, but when it's done badly, it's done really badly, and when it's done interestingly, it can still be done really badly. And so when you do it right, it really hits. And this is a song that really hits. And again, another one of a string of great singles from Big Sleep, because they're such a cool band. Go out and check out their brand new single, Go. Next up, we have Vera with Leave Me Alone. Their brand new single, and we've covered them on the podcast before, and I absolutely loved this track. It's kind of a rolling, tumbling indie track, a commanding presence to how it is vocally delivered and musically delivered. Again, almost like the Big Sleep thing, a band that are only coming out with singles, only kind of finding their way. and then just like, oh, that's just, that could be, whatever. That could be whatever bands they're listening to. It could be something from a band who've released a couple of albums. It could be something from bands like Dinner Party or something like that. And I really, really like this. As well, it's kind of musically intricate. There's lots of kind of punctuations and harmonies and things within the music that really speak to a band that really sit and write. You can feel it with their music. This is something that you can either feel that they've really worked on, they really honed together. This isn't thrown together music, that they spend a lot of time and care with this, which will really stand to them, because I think this is a great, great track. And it has those kind of gothic elements to the indie as well. There's these darkly lit aspects to it. And it's kind of a real sign of how indie music is kind of moving away from the more recent kind of like people screaming into microphones thing, and into kind of stuff that has a more brooding element to it, has a more intricate element to it, has a more layered element to it. And I think it's really great. I think it's a great, great track from Vera, and yeah, I absolutely love this one. It's called Leave Me Alone. It's a brand new single by Vera. Check it out on the playlist or wherever you want to check their music out. Next up, we have Kingfisher. No E. With their brand new single, I Cried, I Wept. And I really like this song as well. Moving around and having kind of different kind of takes and sounds to music and different kind of, being open to multiple things. I really like this because it's a really big heart on the sleeve release and song, and it's especially heart on sleeve by how it is sang, because the singer really goes for it in this song from the very beginning. It's really kind of boom, heart-wrenching kind of type thing, reminiscent of maybe a Dermot Kennedy or even a little bit of Lewis Capaldi, in that it really reaches. It really reaches for it, and it's kind of ambitious in its nature. It's ambitious in its sound. It's quite widescreen. It is very much going for the big scope. I know they're a band. I believe they're playing bigger venues, and it fits that. It fits that kind of feel. We're talking about music that moves people, music that engages people, and this is definitely it. And what really struck me again is the performance, is how heart on sleeve and how wrought it is. And I do love a bit of rawness, a little bit of melodrama in the music. Why not? But yeah, that is Fisher with their brand new single, I Cried, I Wept. It's on the playlist Count has chosen. Next up, we have Dunks and his brand new single, Heaven in All Forms. And yeah, this is a deeply textured, deeply layered, kind of distorted, not distorted, kind of like just the edges of it feel with all the textures that are going on. That there's just like hitting little kind of lo-fi-ish edges and distortions to it, with a kind of a crooner vocal on it, which I found quite interesting. It's kind of crooned in the way it's kind of sang, and that kind of, it's not sang like that. He's be like, well, that's not how I sing. But it's kind of, if I were to do it, if I were to do it, in a great tradition as well of indie and kind of rock-ish kind of elements and kind of bands like that. Whenever I think of a crooner singing over popular music, I always think of Brian Ferry, actually. Who was a master at it, and it has a bit of that, that kind of the crooner vocal over the more electronic, kind of textured sound, and being able to hold focus and hold attention. And yeah, Dunks does that in Heaven in All Forms, kind of a crooner, deeply textured song. It's on the playlist. Check it out, give it a listen. And finally, we end with Kieran Lavery and Liz Lawrence on their single, and it is a kind of an electronic synthetic song. Oh, it's called Control Alt Delete as well. It is, it's kind of this kind of interesting electronic kind of synthetic nature to it, playing with those elements of computerization and kind of AI and ideas like that. And it just feels, it has this kind of synth wave, going to throw back to that, but also this kind of futurist feel to it, and kind of the way Liz Lawrence's voice is affected in it as well really plays into it, really plays into the mood and the tone of it, and the thematic edges to it, which I think was really cool. And yeah, I really like this track in just how it takes those themes and moods and melds them into a song, and has both performers playing different roles, which I really like. So that's, yeah, Control Alt Delete by Kieran Lavery and Liz Lawrence. It's on the playlist, as are all of these tracks. And the Count of Monte Playlisto shall ride again next week with brand new music and brand new picks for the playlist, but do check it out in the meantime. But that's it for the Count for this week. And so it goes, and there it went. But before I go, thank you for listening and viewing the Last Mixtape podcast. You can subscribe to us in all the usual places and spaces, on Spotify, on Apple, and you can watch us in the visual world on YouTube. You can also like, subscribe and comment and do all the bits that helps the podcast and the video podcast grow. That would be really cool. You can also submit your new music to the Count of Monte playlisto via me, who is definitely not the Count of Monte playlisto. We're two different people. Stephen at thelastmixtape.com with the headline TLMT podcast. But for now, that was the Last Mixtape podcast. You were the listener and the viewer. I was Stephen White. Hey, so long.